there's a fatigue that sets in. Like it's hard to keep people at this state of Adolf Hitler is taking over my country right in front of me for 8 straight years. Like at a certain point, it's just really hard to get that much energy out of them. I think a huge factor in it is that all of the stories turned out to be lies. I think that it's very hard to measure these things, especially in real time. But the fact that in 2003, America invaded Iraq based off lies, and the entire media sold those lies to the point that it's very hard for people today to understand, but I'm old enough that I was an adult, a young adult at the time, that the American people, and I imagine the British people as well, but I can certainly say the American people were overwhelmingly convinced that Saddam Hussein was in on 9/11. And he had nuclear weapons, and he was going to hand them off to these terrorists. And in a post 9/11 world, we just could not risk that. And that's why George W. Bush just had to go into Iraq. I mean, he didn't really want to do it, but he had to, because you just can't deal with that risk. And then every right-winger in America would have been like, what are you, a queer? Of course you know that's true. Like, what do you hate America? I mean, if you don't believe that, then you hate it. And then to find out not only that it wasn't true, but that it was lies, that the neoconservatives had wanted this regime change war going back to the 90s, that there were a lot of powerful interests, including Benjamin Netanyahu, who wanted America to overthrow Saddam Hussein for completely separate reasons. Whether you agree with them or not, I certainly don't, but whether you agree with them or not, they just had nothing to do with 9/11, had nothing to do with Al-Qaeda. Okay, so everybody knows that. Now, like, everybody looks back at the war in Iraq like, yeah, that was a mistake. We were lied into war. Even John McCain admitted it in his memoir before he died. So that's about as big a consensus as you can get. But what is the long-term cost of that? The long-term cost of that is a tremendous degradation in the trust in corporate media. And even the media today, they can wonder why their numbers are plummeting and why everybody's tuning them out. But okay, I know that was 20 years ago, but that has a huge effect for the next generation. And so I think that part of the factor, getting back to the question of why the left-wing activists are not as outraged as they used to be, it's like they all bought into Russiagate, and they all bought into the COVID stuff. And that has now been exposed, just like the war in Iraq was. It's not that they got it wrong. It's that it was lies. And like, you can go through this. A friend of mine, Scott Horton, just wrote this great book called Provoked, which is about the history of U.S.-Russia relations after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And there's a chapter in there about Russiagate, which is just phenomenal. But if you've been paying attention to like Aaron Mattei, Glenn Greenwald, Matt Taibbi, there's been a bunch of great reporting done on this. But it's not like they got it wrong. They lied. I mean, the FBI knew Carter Page was not a Russian spy and still went to the FISA court 3 times to get warrants to spy on Trump's campaign, knowing that they were not spying on a Russian spy, that they were just trying to get Donald Trump. And through the whole thing, the whole 3 years of the Mueller investigation, everybody involved knew that Donald Trump isn't a Russian spy. There was no conspiracy here. It was simply a way to box him out of doing what he ran on, which was having détente with Russia and ending the wars in the Middle East. They wanted to stop him from doing that. And so they called him a Russian spy, so that if he did a deal with Russia, basically he was boxed out from being able to do a deal with Russia, because if you're being called a Russian spy every day and then he announced some deal with Russia, it'd be like, see, proof, he's a spy. So there's that. I don't even think I need to do COVID. I mean, the whole thing was completely based off lies. The Great Barrington Declaration in 2020 should have been the end of the whole thing, and they kept it going for 2 more years off absolute nonsense and just ruined millions of people's lives. So there's that. That wears away at them. Yes. Yeah, billions if you want to go international.
Yeah.
And then I got to say, I think another factor that is just something that for partisan reasons, it's almost like no one really wants to talk about this, but a major factor in why Donald Trump was not getting protested in the last few months by these left-wing activists is because the exact same type of young left-winger who would be in Antifa or Black Bloc or would be the Trump protester. Well, they've spent the entire last year protesting what they view as a genocide in Gaza. And while they're out protesting this genocide, and you know, forget the debate over whether you consider it a genocide or not. I mean, they do, but no matter what side of it you're on, there are women and children dying in horrific ways by the tens of thousands. And you know what I mean? Like, however, even if you're like pro-Israel, you'd still acknowledge like what's happening to Gaza right now is really horrible. And even if your position, which I would disagree with, but if your position is like Israel just has no other choice, they have to do this, more people will die if they don't do this, which would really be the only justification for inflicting this type of human suffering on any group of people. But even if you believe that, you kind of can't deny the human suffering that's happening, and that a lot of those women and children, they weren't members of Hamas and they never had any say in any of this. They were just born into this situation. And so if you're protesting that for a year, and by the way, you're also protesting the Biden regime as the ones arming and funding the whole thing. So you're protesting that, and then they want to get you to turn around and protest Tony Hinchcliffe. That's just tough. That's tough for any human being to be like, I thought we were protesting the thing where I just saw a baby suffocate to death. That's what I'm protesting. And then they go, no. There's a shot comic doing a roast routine. We're doing that next. I mean, just like on any human level, it's just very hard to like get, you know, like it'd be like if you came home one day and you found out that your wife is cheating on you, and then you're like, oh my God, I'm heartbroken, I'm furious, I have all these emotions. And then someone went, oh, wait, there's more. No one did the dishes last night. And you just kind of be like, well, yeah, I don't really care about that so much right now because I just had like this major thing come up. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like a human reaction. And so I do think that, you know, and this is a huge part of the story of why Kamala Harris lost so badly, that if you look at the polls, 50% of Democratic voters consider what's happening in Gaza a genocide. Something like 78% of them want a ceasefire now. Their entire base is so opposed to the policy that they've been carrying out. And that's just, I think that's a major factor in why she did so poorly and why they just couldn't generate the outrage against Trump, even though Trump is more of a hawk than Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are on Gaza. Even though he's more pro-Israel than them, it's still this administration is the one who's been backing the policy that they're protesting. It's just very hard to make that switch.
Yeah, those are all very good points. I mean, I'll throw one more in there, which is an obvious one, but I think it's so obvious it gets overlooked. And this is that Trump was already in power for 4 years.
Oh yeah.
So all of the hype,
point.
all the hype they were able to do in 2015, 2016. Oh my gosh, this is going to be the return of the Third Reich. He's going to roll back people's rights. He's going to do this to black people. He's going to do whatever people were saying. It's like, okay, well, they were in power for 4 years. And as far as most Americans know, prior to all the lockdowns, the US was actually doing pretty well in that time. It certainly didn't become a fascist regime. So when the media sort of gears that up, and then they did it again in 2020, and maybe it worked to some degree. But then, I mean, to pull out the same playbook one more time and try to convince you that, oh yeah, this guy's a Nazi and he's going to do this and that. I do think that even people, maybe they don't say it out loud, but in their brain, they're a bit like, is he though? Maybe even if you don't like him, you're like, maybe I don't like him, but he didn't do any of that last time.
No, so. that's a great point. And there, I would just add a little bit more to it, but it's a great point because when Donald Trump came in 2016, you could at least play, which I'll admit I felt a little bit of, like there was just this wild card factor to him. And when they would say things like, do you really trust Donald Trump with the nuclear codes? And you'd be like, I mean, he is a little bit of a wild guy. And like, who knows? He's never been in the military or in government before. And maybe he would be a little bit too trigger happy. And so you could kind of play to this unknown thing. So then Donald Trump comes in and, right, as you say, his first 3 years, whether you have criticisms of them or not, they were a continuation of America. It's not like, like you could say like I would certainly have some criticisms where I'd be like, well, government spending was too high and there was too much money printing and there were too many, I would have liked him to end a lot of the foreign conflicts, but that he didn't, although he didn't start new ones. And he ultimately worked out the deal to end Afghanistan. He kept that going through his whole, so like there's complaints that I could have, but it wasn't a rise of a Hitlerian figure. It wasn't fascism. Now, what you said when they redid it in 2020, if you could put yourself in November of 2020 or the months leading up to the election, and now you've had, first of all, you've had the media insanity of the last 4 years. You've had the left-wing insanity of the last 4 years. You've had lockdowns. You've had the Summer of Love, Black Lives Matter riots. You've just, your society has been... Yes, that's right. The great nation of Chaz has been formed. It was a wild 4 years, and then the 2020 was a really awful year for the American people. Though at the time, the worst year in modern American history, and true for globally, as you pointed out. And so when Joe Biden is running against Donald Trump, you could understand where there was an appeal, there was a pitch. And I'm not making any comments on what anyone believes about the 2020 election or whether it was, legitimate or not. By the way, I think the whole thing was always rigged against Donald Trump, but I don't think there's been any evidence that's really been demonstrated that like voting machines were flipped or anything like that. I'm not saying I wouldn't believe it if I saw the evidence, I just haven't seen it. But Joe Biden, the guy who's been in the Senate for 160 years and was the former vice president, he could plausibly pitch the American people on what he did, which was a return to normalcy. Let's just go back to normal. Enough of this craziness. And I think there were a lot of people, even people who recognized that it was the left freaking out and the left making things worse, that were like, yeah, but Donald Trump evokes that out of them. And I'd rather just not have this craziness. And so there was... But the real problem, right, to add one more level to the point you made, which is a very good one, is that then we didn't go back to normal. Joe Biden came in, and then 2021, 2022, these were more awful years for the American people. Nothing went back to normal. We had, his attempts to create the Ministry of Truth and whatever they called it at the Department of Homeland Security, the Board on Misinformation. You had his attempts to use the OSHA mandates to force people to either take this vaccine or lose their livelihoods. There was just all this craziness. And so then... Now, the dynamic in 2024 was that at least the first 3 years of Donald Trump's presidency, that seems like normal. Like that seems like, oh, I wish we could just go back to 2017 problems and not have to deal with 2022 problems. And so they completely lost. Not only have we had 4 years of the guy, but then we also had 4 years of going back to you where things were crazier than ever. And so it's just there was no compelling... hey, get up, 20-year-old left-winger, and go throw a rock through a window over this. Just doesn't seem to hit home anymore.
Today's episode is brought to you by Sambroza, the best way to get your 8 hours of rest. I met the owners of the company while they were on tour with Tucker Carlson, and their nighttime syrup has been a game changer for me. It's really effective to get your quality rest at night. Sambroza contains a natural base of 7 organic herbs, honey, and a small amount of antihistamine. It's effective and soothing with no harsh chemicals, no high fructose corn syrup, no artificial colors or dyes, and it helps with nighttime allergies. Sambroza is a family-owned company who share my values of faith, freedom, and integrity. I've been using their products since before they started sponsoring this podcast, so I can personally vouch for its quality. My listeners can try Sambroza today and get 10% off by going to sambroza.com/Zuby10. That's SAMBROSA.com/Zuby10 for 10% off. Try Sambroza and wake up ready to embrace life's opportunities.